So picture this. You pull up to an overturned tanker truck on this really rainy, isolated stretch of highway. And there's a strange, like, sickly, sweet-smelling liquid just pouring out of a ruptured valve right onto the asphalt. You have zero idea what this chemical is. You have no backup yet, and you have exactly 30 minutes before a bad situation potentially escalates into, well, a mass casualty event.
Yeah, that is the ultimate nightmare scenario for a first responder.
Right. So what do you actually do? Today, we are taking a deep dive into the exact mental frameworks and, the survival rules that keep people alive when things go horribly wrong on the road. We're looking at the 2024 Emergency Response Guidebook, which is commonly known as the ERG.
And it's worth noting our stack of sources today is pretty intense. We've got the official study guides, the quick reference cheat sheets, and the actual flowcharts used by firefighters, EMS, law enforcement, and hazmat teams all across the United States, Canada, and Mexico.
Exactly. And I want to set the stakes right out of the gate here, because this isn't some textbook for a leisurely chemistry class, is it?
Oh, not at all. No, this is a manual forged by sheer necessity. When a responder arrives on the scene of a hazardous material spill, they're essentially walking into an invisible minefield.
Wow.
Yeah. And the ERG is basically the map that gets them through that initial shock and awe. The mission of this deep dive is to decode that really high-pressure, split-second decision-making matrix.
Right, because the time frame this book is built for is incredibly specific, which I just found fascinating. I mean, it is completely useless for long-term chemical cleanup.
Right, it doesn't care about the environmental remediation of the soil next month.
Or, like, how the local water treatment plant is going to handle the runoff tomorrow. Its sole obsessive purpose is just to keep people alive for the first 30 minutes of an emergency.
Yeah, it's a rapid scene recognition tool.
Yeah.
Because that 30-minute window, that is the most lethal phase of any hazmat incident.
Because it's just pure chaos at that point.
Exactly. The ERG is designed to force a responder to identify the hazard quickly, protect the public, protect themselves, and lock down the perimeter. It literally demands that you establish control before the environment controls you.
Reading through it, I mean, it really reads like a trauma triage manual, where the very first bolded instruction is basically, whatever you do, do not make this worse.
Yes, do no harm, but for highway explosions.
Right. And the sources are incredibly strict about this physical discipline. They command responders to, never touch the material, avoid walking through any vapor clouds, and this one shocked me. Never assume the warning placards on the side of the truck are actually telling the truth.
Because things get mislabeled all the time.
But so here's my question. If you have an overturned truck and no reliable information, I mean, you still have to park your fire engine somewhere, right? You still have to step out of the cab. How do you even know where to stand without getting hurt?
Well, if you don't know what you're dealing with, the guidebook basically forces you to fall back on fundamental physics and geography. It introduces these things called the golden rules of emergency response.
Which are time, distance, and shielding, right?
Exactly. Time, distance, and shielding. The mandatory physical approach for any responder arriving at an unknown scene is always, without fail, uphill, upwind, and upstream.
Okay, so you are basically letting gravity and meteorology do the heavy lifting for your safety.
That's a great way to put it.
Because, I mean, uphill ensures that whatever is leaking doesn't literally flow down into your boots.
Right. And upwind keeps the invisible toxic gases blowing away from your respiratory system.
And then upstream guarantees that nothing travels down the local water supply toward your command post. You're basically using the natural environment as your first layer of armor.
You are. But, the ERG also has this built-in panic button for when the substance is just an absolute mystery. It's known as Guide 111.
Oh, yeah, Guide 111, the protocol for the big unknown. I imagine this is for when a truck is, completely mangled, there are 0 placards visible, and maybe the driver is incapacitated.
Exactly. In that scenario, Guide 111 dictates an immediate, non-negotiable isolation zone of at least 100 meters.
Which is, what, about 330 feet?
Yeah, about 330 feet in all directions. You just draw this massive invisible circle around the incident and absolutely deny entry to everyone.
Even other cops and firefighters.
Especially other cops and firefighters. The core first responder philosophy, which is printed right there in the text, is when in doubt, treat as worst case, isolate more, not less.
Isolate more, not less. That makes sense. I mean, you can always shrink a massive isolation zone later once you finally figure out what the chemical is.
Exactly. But if you start too small and you guess wrong, You cannot undo the lethal exposure of the crowd that just gathered to watch the crash.
Wow. Yeah, it requires a lot of discipline to just stand back and watch a wreck burn from a literal football field away, especially for people whose entire career is built on rushing in to help.
It goes against every instinct they have.
But having that massive perimeter is basically just buying time.
Yeah.
Eventually, you do have to figure out what the invisible enemy actually is. And the guidebook relies on this really highly specific, color-coded navigation system to do that.
Yeah, the colored pages.
Right. The pages are split into yellow, blue, orange, and green sections.
And there's some really fascinating human factors engineering heavily at play here.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, think about it. When your heart rate spikes to, like, 160 beats per minute during a chaotic emergency, your complex reasoning and reading comprehension severely degrade.
Oh, sure. You get tunnel vision.
Exactly. Intricate instructions completely fail under that kind of stress. But recognizing bold colors, that cognitive ability remains completely intact.
That is so smart. Now, I noticed the structure here, and initially when I was going through the sources, I actually thought it was a design flaw.
Really? Why is that?
Well, you have the yellow pages, right? Which index the 4-digit UN or NA identification numbers that you find on the outside of trucks. Then you have the blue pages, which index the alphabetical names of the chemicals. But both of those sections ultimately just point you to the orange pages.
Right. The orange pages contain the actual step-by-step response guides for fire, health risks, and spills.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it like, wait, doesn't it seem redundant to have two different indexes pointing to the exact same place? Doesn't that redundancy waste precious time when every second counts?
Well, but thinking about the cognitive load theory we just mentioned, processing a random 4-digit number utilizes a completely different mental pathway than reading a word like gasoline.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's entirely about adapting to the fractured, incomplete information you find on a chaotic street. I mean, you're rarely handed a beautifully completed puzzle at a hazmat scene.
Okay, that paints a picture.
Imagine a truck is completely engulfed in flames, and you are stuck 330 feet away, just looking through binoculars. You might spot a charred diamond placard on the back of the tanker, with the 4-digit number 1203 barely visible. So you flip to the yellow pages, you find 1203, you learn it's gasoline, and it routes you straight to Orange Guide 128.
Ah, okay. But if the truck isn't on fire, and say, the driver stumbles out of the cab, handing you a crumpled shipping manifest that just says gasoline without any numbers at all.
Exactly. Then you use the blue pages to look it up alphabetically, and it takes you to the exact same Orange Guide 128.
Okay, I get it now. Both the yellow and blue sections act as these cognitive funnels. They take whatever random scrap of information you manage to pull from the chaos and instantly route you to the orange action pages.
Yep. Giving you immediate instructions for, in that case, a flammable liquid spill.
It is essentially a search engine built out of paper for whatever keyword you happen to have.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
But, before a responder even cracks the spine of this book to look up a number or a name, they really rely on a visual language that is painted all over the highway system.
The placards.
Yes, the sources go into detail about the visual clues that just scream danger from hundreds of feet away, starting with those diamond-shaped placards.
The color and symbols on those placards are immediate triage tools. For example, a red placard indicates the material is flammable. A white placard with a skull and crossbones denotes toxic or poison gas.
And then there is the W with a solid line drawn through it, which means the material reacts dangerously with water.
Yeah, that one is critical.
I have to imagine seeing that W requires a massive psychological override for a firefighter. I mean, their absolute first ingrained instinct is to put water on a problem. Telling a firefighter not to use water is like telling a golden retriever not to chase a tennis ball.
It really is. But hitting a water-reactive chemical with a fire hose can generate a lethal toxic gas cloud or even trigger a massive thermal explosion. So they have to resist that urge.
Wow.
And, the visual cues don't stop at the placards either. The physical silhouette of the container itself actually predicts the hazard.
The shape of the truck.
Exactly. The ERG trains responders to differentiate between, say, an MC306 highway tanker, which is your standard oval-shaped fuel truck carrying liquids,
right,
and a rail pressure car, which looks like a giant, heavily reinforced metal pill.
Right, because that specific pill shape warns you that the contents are under extreme pressure, which radically changes the explosion potential.
It changes everything about the approach.
Which brings up one of the most terrifying acronyms in the entire study guide, and I want to get your thoughts on this. BLEV.
Oh, yeah. BLEV.
It stands for Boiling Liquid Expanding Vapor Explosion, and the sources explicitly single this out as a major risk for UN 10N75, which is liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG.
A BLV is basically the ultimate nightmare scenario for a responder because of the sheer scale of the devastation.
Can you paint a picture of what that actually looks like on the ground?
Absolutely. To grasp why the ERG treats it with such reverence, you have to look at the thermodynamics happening inside that tank. So you have a pressurized, heavily armored container filled with a flammable liquid, like propane. If a fire starts underneath it or directly next to it, the flames start impinging on the metal shell.
So the tank essentially becomes a giant pressure cooker just left on a hot stove burner.
Yes. The liquid inside absorbs the heat and begins to boil rapidly, turning into vapor. And vapor requires vastly more volume than liquid, right?
Right.
So the internal pressure inside the sealed tank just skyrockets. Simultaneously, the external fire is superheating the metal shell, drastically reducing its tensile strength.
Oh no, so the metal is getting weaker while the pressure is getting stronger.
Exactly. You have rising internal pressure pushing relentlessly against weakening external metal, and when the metal finally yields, it fails catastrophically. The pressurized liquid instantly expands into a massive vapor cloud, ignites, and creates a fireball that can literally vaporize everything in a massive radius.
That is horrifying. But I mean, you can't just wait around to see the metal start bulging before deciding to run, right? Then there have to be auditory or visual cues, like a pressure cooker whistling before the shell actually gives way.
There are, and the ERG specifically trains responders to listen for them. One of the main things is the safety relief valves venting gas. As the pressure builds, the pitch and volume of those valves rise significantly.
Like a kettle boiling.
More like a jet engine schooling up on the highway.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Responders also look at exactly where the flames are touching the tank. If the fire is hitting the vapor space of the tank, so the top section where there is no liquid inside absorbing the heat, that metal will weaken much, much faster.
Because there's no liquid acting as a heat sink on the other side of the wall.
Exactly.
I was reading about the historical reality of these explosions, and it is staggering. Shrapnel from a BLV, like massive chunks of jagged, heavy steel, can be thrown for thousands of feet. It turns a piece of highway infrastructure into a massive fragmentation grenade.
It's completely devastating.
So the protocol, when a responder hears that jet engine sound or sees flames on the vapor space, I mean, that cannot involve rushing in with a hose.
No. The only ERG-approved action in that specific scenario is immediate withdrawal. Yes. If responders can do it safely from maximum distance, perhaps by setting up unmanned water monitors to just constantly cool the tanks, they will. But if the risk is too high, the ERG mandates pulling back, establishing a massive perimeter, and simply letting it burn.
Letting it burn.
Yeah, because you cannot stop a BLE once the structural integrity of the metal is compromised.
That really reinforces that foundational rule of not making it worse, even if it means retreating. But so, while a towering fireball is a very obvious visceral threat, the guidebook warns that the most lethal hazards on the road are often completely invisible.
Yes, the invisible killers.
Right, which brings us to the infamous green pages of the ERG.
The green pages are where things get incredibly technical. They introduce complex atmospheric physics into the emergency response.
And they are reserved exclusively for what the ERG categorizes as toxic inhalation hazards, or TIH. Right. So if a responder looks up a chemical in the yellow or blue pages and the entry has this bright green highlight over it, that is a massive red flag. It means the substance like UN 1017, which is chlorine, or UN 1005, which is ammonia, is severely corrosive or toxic to the human respiratory tract.
Right, and that green highlight forces the responder to immediately flip to the green pages to calculate precise evacuation zones based on the size of the spill.
And a small spill is defined as anything less than 55 gallons, like a single leaking drum. A large spill is anything over 55 gallons, like a breached tanker.
The green pages really represent a shift from dealing with localized physical trauma, like a fire, to managing a drifting, invisible mass casualty event.
See, I read the specific rules on protective action distances, the actual square footage you have to evacuate, and it completely threw me.
The day and night difference.
Yes. The sources dictate that evacuation zones are drastically larger at night than they are during the day. And intuitively, I was thinking, well, maybe the dark just makes the cloud harder to see. But the guide treats nightfall as a fundamentally more lethal meteorological condition. Why would the absence of sunlight make a toxic gas release more dangerous?
It's fascinating, really. It centers entirely on a meteorological phenomena known as a temperature inversion.
Okay, break that down for me.
So during the day, solar radiation heats the surface of the Earth, right? The ground, in turn, warms the layer of air immediately above it. Because warmer air is less dense, it rises, creating this constant vertical atmospheric mixing. Updrafts pull the air up and daytime winds disperse it.
So the atmosphere basically acts like a massive dilution machine, just pulling the toxic hazard up and away from human height.
Exactly. But at night, that entire vertical mixing engine completely shuts down. The ground loses its heat and actually cools the air layer resting right above it.
Oh, I see.
This creates a dense, cold layer of air trapped near the surface, and it's often capped by warmer air above, so there are no thermal updrafts. Furthermore, nighttime winds tend to be calmer and highly directional.
Right, so without those updrafts to break it apart, the toxic vapor cloud stays incredibly concentrated.
Extremely concentrated. It hugs the asphalt, and a light, steady nighttime breeze will push that dense, lethal mass downwind for miles.
The hazard zone basically stretches out like a long, invisible river of toxic gas.
That invisible river is exactly why the ERG mandates significantly larger protective action distances after sunset. The gas just travels much further while maintaining a concentration high enough to cause severe respiratory failure.
Wow. Understanding that ground-hugging behavior really reframes a tactic that feels completely counterintuitive to a civilian. I mean, if there is a chemical leak, the natural human instinct is to run away as fast as possible.
Run to your car and drive away.
Right. But the sources note that for heavy gases like chlorine or ammonia, responders will often issue a shelter-in-place order. They literally tell civilians to stay indoors, use duct tape to seal their windows, and shut off their HVAC systems.
Because attempting to evacuate through a dense, ground-hugging toxic cloud is frequently a fatal mistake.
Because cars aren't airtight.
Not at all. A standard civilian vehicle is far from airtight. Driving through a concentrated chlorine plume means the engine will pull in that toxic air, potentially stalling from oxygen displacement and leaving the occupants trapped inside a lethal environment.
That is terrifying. But applying the third golden rule shielding makes perfect sense here. The walls and sealed windows of a house hold a pocket of clean, breathable air that can sustain a family until the invisible toxic river flows past their neighborhood.
Right, so responders are literally forced to do real-time meteorological calculations on the hood of a fire engine just to decide if running or hiding is mathematically safer for a neighborhood.
The sheer mental bandwidth required for that is just staggering. And, as if calculating temperature inversions wasn't enough, the ERG is not just adapting to the weather anymore.
No, it's not.
The latter half of the book, specifically pages 344 through 392, reveals how this guide has evolved to address a much darker reality. Because we have spent this entire time assuming the leaking tanker was an accident.
Right. But the modern first responder operates in an environment where hazards are frequently deployed with lethal intent.
Yeah.
The ERG has expanded its scope significantly to address intentional human threats, weaponized chemicals, and, unfortunately, traps.
The training basically shifts them from being purely medical rescuers to acting as crime scene detectives. They are explicitly trained to look for improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, and the warning signs of what the guide terms chemical suicide.
It represents a really tragic but vital evolution of the response protocols. Responders must pause and evaluate a scene for highly specific anomalies before intervening.
Like what kind of anomalies?
For IEDs, the ERG instructs them to scan for unattended packages, exposed wiring, or unusually modified containers that clearly do not belong in a civilian environment.
And the chemical suicide protocols are incredibly grim. The sources outline a scenario where a responder approaches a parked car, right? And they're trained to look for windows sealed with tape, warning signs taped to the glass, visible chemical buckets on the floorboards, or the distinct, overwhelming odor of sulfur and rotten eggs leaking from the seams of the doors.
Facing a sealed vehicle with an unresponsive person inside triggers a profound conflict for a first responder.
I can only imagine.
I mean, the fundamental instinct is to rip the door open and initiate life-saving care.
Of course.
But the ERG explicitly prohibits this. Opening that door releases a massive, highly concentrated cloud of toxic gas directly into the responder's face.
It essentially turns the basic instinct of rescue into a lethal trigger.
It does.
The manual demands they stop, put on full self-contained breathing apparatus, ventilate the area with extreme caution, and immediately notify law enforcement and bomb squads. I mean, they are no longer managing a hazmat spill. They are navigating a potential crime scene and a highly lethal trap designed to create secondary victims.
The burden on the initial responder is immense. But it's important to remember the ERG does not expect them to resolve a complex chemical weapon or a bizarre industrial mixture in isolation.
Right. They aren't totally alone.
Exactly. The Guidebook provides a lifeline to national emergency contacts.
Those 247 hotlines, like Chemtrec in the United States and Canutech in Canada, they act as technical backup.
Yes. A firefighter standing on a dark highway can call those numbers and be instantly connected with chemical engineers, toxicologists, and the actual manufacturers of the materials involved.
So the ERG provides the immediate survival architecture for the first 30 minutes. But those national agencies provide the advanced science and logistical support required to actually mitigate the disaster and clean up the environment over the following days and weeks.
That's exactly how the system is supposed to work together.
Looking back at the anatomy of this response, I mean, the escalation is just incredible. We started by defining that intense 30-minute triage window, relying on the golden rules of time, distance, and shielding, and just letting gravity do the work by staying uphill and upwind.
And we explore the human factors engineering behind the colors, too.
Right. How a stressed brain uses the yellow pages for numbers and the blue pages for names, funneling everything into those orange action guides.
We examine the visual intelligence gathered from the highway, how the silhouette of a pressure car or a red diamond placard warns of a catastrophic BLEE.
Forcing a responder to listen for the scream of a venting safety valve before the metal fails. And we dove into the atmospheric physics of the green pages, calculating how nighttime temperature inversions create those invisible rivers of toxic gas that mandate sheltering in place rather than fleeing.
And finally, we saw the dark evolution of the manual, treating intentional threats and chemical traps with the precision of a detective.
It is an unbelievable matrix of physics, psychology, and meteorology, all compressed into a 30-minute window where every single decision dictates who lives and who dies.
It really exposes the profound technical expertise required of the people who arrive first on the scene, operating under conditions that would completely paralyze most people.
It truly changes how you look at the infrastructure we take for granted, which brings me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over on your own. We've spent this entire deep dive looking through the eyes of a first responder, imagining the chaos, the calculations, and the immense pressure of a shattered tanker truck. But take a moment to think about your own daily routine. Think about your morning commute. The next time you are driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour and you pass a commercial semi-truck, just glance at the back of the trailer. If you spot a colored diamond placard with a 4-digit number like 1203 or 1017, realize what you're actually driving next to.
Yeah.
You are sharing the asphalt with materials so volatile, so potentially catastrophic, that they require their own designated chapters in a life or death playbook just to keep the surrounding city safe if something goes wrong. How closely will you look at the trucks in the lane next to you tomorrow?